We're returning now to the revolution in Syria. I'm joined by the former British lawmaker and host of the mother of all talk shows, George Galloway, who's previously spent time with President Bashar al-Assad. George, thanks for joining me again on Uncensored. You appear to have gone into some form of grief about the downfall of this ruthless, vile dictator. Why?
Well, when you say I spent time with Bashar al-Assad, you might have added that I spent time with him in Buckingham Palace when he was a guest of Her Majesty the Queen, literally living in the spare room at Buckingham Palace. The night before, going down the Mall in an open-top coach with Her Majesty on a royal trot around central London. You might have mentioned that Tony Blair suggested a knighthood for Bashar al-Assad. I've met him once, twice in my life, and the second time, not on my own. So grief, no, my grief is for Syria. My grief is for the Syrian people, who are now ruled by ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And if you were being honest with yourself, knowing what you do about ISIS and Al-Qaeda, you'd be grieving with me.
Well, I certainly think there are a lot of concerns, legitimate concerns, about the leader of the rebels, who clearly was running part of Al-Qaeda in Syria. That's unquestionable. He says he's a changed person. He's distanced himself from, as he puts it, the extremists. I think we have to wait and see how this plays out and see if he is true to his word. Certainly the Americans seem to be buying into that at the moment and are supporting him, as are many other countries. In this country, for example, in the UK, I've seen that the government is saying we may have to unprescribe the group that he represents as a terror group in light of what's happened. So there's a lot going on here. And clearly there are a lot of groups in Syria, and there's a lot of people who are claiming they have gone from extreme fundamentalism to more moderate positions. Let's wait and see. It has been known to happen. I would say to you, though, I'm not talking really about what happened with Assad when he first came to power, because he was all the things that you've rightly articulated. I just find it odd that you would view his dismissal now as a bad thing for Syrians. And we made a quick checklist here. This is a guy, I remember I was at CNN at the time with the 2011 Arab Spring. He crushed the peaceful resistance. It led to a devastating civil war, at least 300,000, maybe 500,000 deaths. More than 14 million Syrians had to flee their homes. He fired rockets filled with sarin gas on Ghouta, killing nearly 1,500, mostly women and children. Continued to use chlorine and sarin on his own people between 2014 to 2018. Russian and Syrian government airstrikes killed more than 100,000 Syrians since 2011. Thousands tortured and left to rot in prisons. The prisons are currently being emptied out. People have been kept there, right, in underground, horrific conditions for sometimes decades under this guy. And so whatever the argument, which is a legitimate one, as I say, about what may come next, and we've seen with Libya and with Iraq and even with Iran, sometimes be careful what you wish for, and I'm absolutely cognizant of that. And I'm not getting too excited until I see how this plays out in terms of the leadership. But you cannot defend Assad's record of how he has treated his own people, given the scale of death, destruction, wrongful imprisonment, torture, and so on. Can you?
Well, that's the kind of propaganda porn that you've just adumbrated, that we were treated to about Saddam Hussein to justify invading and occupying Iraq. Both you and me, to our eternal credit, saw through that because we refused to abstract. Even if 1/5 of what you just said there is the case, that is not a justification for making every matter worse. Now, it's true that Paul had a dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, but we know al-Golani. He wasn't just the number 2 to Zarqawi in Iraq. He was the Al-Qaeda number 2 in Iraq, killing British soldiers, by the way, killing American soldiers, by the way. And then he went to Syria and became the number 2 to al-Baghdadi, the founder of ISIS in Syria. So that would knock Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus into a cocked hat. Now, like you, I'm waiting for developments. Like you, I'm ready to treat this on its merits. If the Christian priests are not massacred, if the nuns are not kidnapped, if the religious minorities and Kurdish minorities and Druze minorities are not hunted down, like Golani did just 7 years ago, well, nobody will be happier than me. But you used the words, be careful what you wish for. In the Umayyad mosque in Damascus yesterday, his supporters were chanting that they're on their way to Jerusalem next. And after Jerusalem, they're on their way to Mecca next. Now, I could live with that, Piers. I'm not sure that you could.
Listen, I'm not trying to make a defense of any of it at the moment. I think it's a very turbulent situation. As you know, I've got relatives, including my brother, who've been in the military, and you can make a very good argument that when you depose dictators, it often leads to a worse situation. I mean, I think that's inarguable. And I'm not saying for a moment that I have absolute confidence that won't happen here, but I certainly wouldn't let that stray into a defense of Assad, who I think is indisputably proven himself to be an evil dictator.
But you're building a straw man there based on something I said in 2005.
So let me be fair to you. Let me be fair. So what is your view of him now?
A guest of Her Majesty.
Right. So what? Okay. So let me ask you again. To be fair to you, I get that point. To be fair to you, what is your current view of Bashar al-Assad?
He's a dictator like all the Arab rulers are dictators. Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, is right now, in Saudi Arabia, freedom-loving Saudi Arabia, trying to get some money out of them for the parlous British economy. The idea that Assad is a worse dictator than the other Arab dictators is for the birds. The real crime of al-Assad was that he allowed the Palestinian resistance to stay, to base, to train, and to live in Syria, and to direct the operations of the Palestinian resistance. That's why they really hate Assad, not for the reasons of dictatorship. All our friends in the Middle East are dictatorships.
I mean, you tweeted in May 2023, I would have been proud to have stood by Syria even if she'd fallen. Watching President Assad towering in the Arab League in Jeddah has made me happy today. Forward to Arab unity and independence. I mean, do you regret saying that?
Absolutely. No, I believe in Arab unity and independence. And the Arab League did bring Assad back into their ranks. And he did tower over them. Because in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is the king. And al-Assad had one eye. All the rest of them are blind. So how would I regret it? I believe in the unity of the Arab people from the Atlantic all the way to the Gulf. I believe in that. Now, there's nothing left of that. Islamism is the way forward that the Arabs appear to have chosen. Be careful what you wish for in supporting that.
I mean, the nature of dictatorship, we've seen so many now being toppled in the Middle East. That surely ultimately has to be a good thing, doesn't it? I mean, historically, when you look at this period in history, you would hope that countries could move forward from being run by dictators, whether it's Saddam Hussein or al-Assad or Gaddafi. I mean, that it has to be better for the world that over time these countries move away from that kind of leadership.
Yeah, sure, but the ones that disappear are the ones that don't do Western bidding, that stand up to Israel. The others are left. And, you know, Keir Starmer's not in Saudi Arabia this week to give them a lecture on their dungeons, their political prisoners, the way that they treat their minorities. He's there as the best of friends of Saudi Arabia. So you have to take a consistent approach to this. I'm against all dictators, always, everywhere. But our government is not. And as you talked about the undoubted horrors of al-Assad's prisons, I got to remembering that Guantanamo Bay is still open.
Yeah, I know.
And
Barack Obama ran in 2008 on one of his manifesto pledges was that he would close it.
Yeah.
And he's a lawyer.
Yeah. So and by the way, al-Assad's jails were used as black prisons by us during the war on terror. We were illegally, extraordinarily renditioning prisoners into Assad's dungeons to be tortured so that we didn't have to do that dirty work ourselves. So the double standard is what I can't accept. I'm all for the downfall of all dictators. I think you and I can agree on that.
We can. And listen, I do think it's all very complex, this. And when people have simplistic overviews about it, I think they're always universally wrong. Let me ask you, there's a lot going on in the world right now, not least in the Middle East. You've seen Israel clearly have military success now, both against Hamas and Hezbollah, which seems to have given them a resurgent popularity. Netanyahu was very unpopular, is now much more popular because these people support what he's been doing with what they perceive to be terrorism. Iran, I would argue, is indisputably been weakened, not just by that, by also what's happened with al-Assad. You could argue that Russia has also been weakened because they basically pulled out of Syria completely. They've got a lot of troops there, but they've tried to get out of there completely. What do you make of the whole situation in totality? Donald Trump's coming in. He's made it clear he wants to end the war in Ukraine. He wants to try and end the wars in the Middle East. But where are we going to be left out of all this in a few months, do you think?
Well, unfortunately, for the purposes of show business, I agreed with all of that you just said. The truth is that the big winners in this are Erdogan, the new Ottoman emperor, whose flag is flying on the citadel in Aleppo for the first time since Lawrence of Arabia and the Syrian Arab national movement drove the Ottomans out in the First World War, and Netanyahu, who looked dead and buried only 15 months ago.
Yeah.
He looked like he was headed for the pokey, and now he's the cock of the walk. And frankly, the Arabs are lying prone on the floor, and only his tender mercies are anything or everything that stands in the way of him doing to them as he pleases. And he's now invading Syria. He's expanding the Israeli so-called buffer zone, occupation zone on Syrian territory. He's cleaned half of the Gaza Strip entirely of its Palestinian population, the north of Gaza. He could right now, tonight, open the gates of Rafah and drive the remaining Palestinians into the desert in Egypt, and nobody, literally nobody, is going to stop him.
And he's got a president coming in who is completely on his side.
Well, we'll see about that. Depends which Donald Trump you meet. If it's the Donald Trump that was campaigning in Michigan on the eve of poll before his greatest comeback since George Foreman's rumble in the jungle, that Donald Trump wants to end the wars. That Donald Trump might be the one, counterintuitively, I'll grant you, who forces Netanyahu to have some mercy and to try and bring about an end to this suppurating conflict that has poisoned world affairs for basically all of my life.
I think Trump, I actually agree with you. I agree with you. I think Trump, I spoke to him last week and it came up about Middle East and Ukraine and Russia. He is instinctively, he's anti-war. Always has been. Apart from anything else, as a business guy, he just thinks war is bad for business. It costs an awful lot of money. It puts enormous strain on the economy. And what do you gain? I mean, his argument, I think, would be actually, if you look at America's wars and interventions over the last 50 years, where could you see a clear victory which justified all the money and all the bloodshed and everything else? And I would agree with him. So I do think he can be surprising. I also think there's a will to get peace now, certainly with the Israel-Hamas war, and I think also with Ukraine-Russia. You can see the rhetoric from Zelensky that he is clearly now ready to do some kind of deal because they're both losing too many people. I mean, Russia's losing 2,000 soldiers a day. That's why they've got the North Koreans coming in.
Well, I've not yet seen a North Korean. I've seen lots of newspaper allusion to a North Korean, but no one's yet produced a North Korean. Either a picture, unlike the fake Daily Telegraph photographs the other day of North Korean women soldiers from years ago in North Korea. I've not yet seen a North Korean, but I think that you are right that Trump's instincts are anti-war. Like you and me, he opposed the Iraq war. He wanted to pull out of Afghanistan, and the Democrats and the military-industrial complex frustrated that, only to then do it in the most humiliating, cataclysmic way, stealing out like a thief in the night, leaving hundreds of billions of dollars of material behind them, and losing quite a number of American and Afghan lives in the process. I do think that Trump's instincts are right, but I worry about the people he's surrounded himself with, Piers. I wish he'd taken you into the White House because, frankly, little Marco Rubio doesn't fill anyone with any sense of confidence. So the coming struggle for Donald Trump will be decisive in world affairs.
Yeah.
And however the war in Ukraine ends, it's going to end in less advantageous terms than it would have done if Boris Johnson hadn't gone all the way to Kiev to scupper the Istanbul peace agreement. Ukraine has lost hundreds of thousands more men and hundreds of thousands more square miles of territory. So the end game will begin in January. One of the reasons why all this chaos is happening is so the Democrats and the military-industrial intelligence complex that stand foursquare against Donald Trump can cause Trump as many problems as possible before he gets in the door on the 20th of January. I could argue this is a kind of coup by the Democrats in the United States. They are willfully denying the settled will, the express will of the people of the United States who voted for an entirely different approach to world affairs, including wars, but who are having fait accompli hammered into place at great cost. I mean, now Joe Biden's about to give aid to the Al-Qaeda ISIS rebrand in Syria.
Yeah, I mean that is an extraordinarily perverse
that's
situation.
been wasted elsewhere.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. What's also interesting to me, and it must be to you, has been the extraordinary evolution of a lot of American Republicans, conservatives, who 30 years ago would have been implacably opposed to any suggestion you would appease a Russian dictator. They totally supported intervening where they believe freedom and democracy had to be defended. Now it's a very different atmosphere, with many, many Republicans in America believing that Trump's mantra of America first, don't intervene, let countries get on with it unless it directly impacts on American national security. It's been a real sea change, hasn't there? Politically, never mind anything else.
Well, cross-dressing is the new zeitgeist, isn't it? And political cross-dressing is what we have experienced so completely on both sides of the Atlantic in recent years. Now it's the left that is in favor of censorship. The left which is in love with the three-letter agencies. The left which is increasingly authoritarian. In the name of liberalism, they're prepared to stamp on anybody, prepared to choke off anybody. Whilst people, as you say, that we would once have said were on the right, are taking a far better line, a far better view on these things. So I don't know where all this cross-dressing is going to
Well, maybe you're
end.
going to have
I
to
don't
identify,
know
George.
which clothes I'll end up wearing.
Well, George, you're going to have to identify as a Republican, aren't you?
Well, I was very happy that Donald Trump beat Kamala Harris. You know, arrest me now.
Were you?
I was very happy. I was very happy, and I endlessly evangelized for it on the mother of all talk shows and elsewhere, because Kamala Harris and the Joe Biden administration have been an unmitigated, unqualified disaster for the American people and for the world. And I reckon that on the principle that even a stopped clock is right twice a day, let's take a chance on Big Donald. At least he's a Scotsman at heart.
Yeah, you know what? I've spoken to him 5 or 6 times in the last 3 months. Once after he got shot and a few times around the election, including the morning after he won and so on. He's definitely a slightly changed man. He's not going to change the combative side or the trash talking or any of that kind of thing. But he's definitely aware that he's been given a second chance at life after not 1 but 2 assassination attempts. People underestimate the second one on the golf course where he was 4 minutes away from being shot dead. And he's also got another chance politically to create a legacy for himself, which he must have in his heart thought, I've blown it. My legacy is going to be January the 6th and all the rest of it. And he's now got a chance with a big mandate to come back and do another 4 years where he hasn't got to scrap away in a campaign again. He can just basically work on delivering on his promises and having a legacy that could be one for the ages. I wouldn't put it past him. I think he's in a far more content place than he was when he won the first time. And then it became a war of attrition with the Democrats, with the media, with everyone. And Trump's just a very pugilistic kind of guy. If you punch him, he punches you 10 times. And it was constant war of attrition. This feels very different. No protest marches, no real aggravation. Most of his opponents have just shut up because what can they say? And the scale of the win, by winning everything, even including the popular vote, and by winning the Latino vote. Who would have thought that 5, 6 years ago? So I do think he feels the hand of history a bit on his shoulder. And ultimately, he's got a big ego and he'll want to go down as a great president. And I wouldn't put it past him.
No, I wouldn't either, and I hope that all happens. He doesn't have to please any vested interests.
Yeah.
If he follows through with the appointments of Kennedy, for example, in the health sphere, he could change medicine, pharma, the American healthcare system so profoundly that he would always be remembered for it. If he follows through with Tulsi Gabbard and the new FBI director, if he forces the rhinos to endorse these people and to get them around that cabinet table, all kinds of things could be opened up. And we could know, for example, I'm very interested in doing so, who really killed Jack Kennedy.
Right.
A personal hero of mine.
Yeah, you know what? Trump may open the files.
On our wall.
Yeah, Trump may well open those files.
Why not open the files?
Yeah.
Well, I very much hope so. So he doesn't have to please anyone. He doesn't have to be re-elected. He's playing for the history books now, and I hope that he rises to the challenge. And I hope he opens the books in Ukraine. I'm absolutely convinced that the scandals that lie within American involvement in the Obama and Biden eras, I think Hunter Biden is just the tip of the iceberg.
You know what? I've always thought
Kerry
that.
child.
I've always thought that, and that's why I think
all of these people.
Yeah, that's why.
That's why they've been so involved in this.
Well, that's why they've
war.
given him.
And there's a lot of dead people.
Yeah, that's why they've given Hunter Biden this blanket immunity, going back to the year he started working in Ukraine, when his father was the vice president and was given
before he started.
Exactly. So it all stinks to high heaven.
January 2014.
Yeah.
Any or all crimes he may have committed.
It stinks.
From January 2014.
Yeah.
He began work in Ukraine in February of 2014.
Yeah.
There are some real bodies buried there.
Yes.
And Trump could do us all a service and bury the Democratic Party once and for all by exposing the extent of the corruption, which led to a lot of dead people and hundreds of billions of burned dollars.
Yeah. I think you may be onto something there. The nature of that blanket immunity to Hunter raised a lot of alarm bells. The timing of it, going back to just when he started working out there and earning $1 million a year as an executive for an energy company with which he had zero experience. They were only buying the access to the vice president. And what access did they get? What did they get back for employing him for all that time? George Galloway, I've got to leave it there. We had a reasonably, almost found ourselves on the same page. Terrifying
Almost
development.
civil.
Terrifying development. But always good to talk to you. Thank you very much.